everyone, and welcome to the October 25th, 2021 City Council meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format, which enables the City Council to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials webpage. Tonight's meeting will include a public forum. If you wish to participate and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speakers queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. We will continue accepting raised hands until 7:35. The meeting moderator will disallow any requests to speak that are made after the deadline. You will have 2.5 minutes to speak. As a reminder, you have the option of turning on your video, and if you choose to do so, when your turn is announced, the moderator will temporarily promote you to panelist status so that you can unmute and turn on your video if you wish. And please use that responsibly. Finally, thank you everyone for your patience, flexibility, and good humor as we carry on with this remote meeting format, longer virtual format than we ever thought we would have to do. But as always, feel free to contact any one of us individually or together via email or voicemail if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. And now I'll formally open this meeting with a land acknowledgement. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalapuya Ilahi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the land. We acknowledge the inherent political sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribal nations in the state of Oregon and all American Indian, Alaska Native people who live here. Thank you again for joining us. Our first item of business is committee reports and items of interest. Are there counselors who have information to share? Counselor Syrett.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to draw attention as I believe the only immigrant and naturalized American citizen on this council, to take the opportunity to share the fact that a report has been published. I don't know if you can see this on camera. It's a report out of the Labor Education and Research Center at the University of Oregon called A State of Immigrants, a New Look at the Immigrant Experience in Oregon. And it's a compilation of several articles and research pieces that look into the current state of our immigrant residents in Oregon. And so I just wanted to call attention to it. It's an important topic and an important report, I believe. And tomorrow evening, the Wayne Morris Center for Law and Politics at the University of Oregon, housed in the law school, is holding a panel discussion on Thursday evening, October 28th at 7 p.m. And I'm sure folks can find the registration link on the Wayne Morris Center's website. And I also wanted to note that there was an article in the paper a week or so about an Oregon Worker Relief Fund that was set up during the pandemic and is managed and supported by CAUSA, the statewide immigrant rights group, and PCUN, which is the Farm Workers Union. And some local governments have put money into this fund to help, and I believe the state as well, to provide support for workers who were impacted by COVID and could not qualify for unemployment benefits or the other benefits that workers who've been impacted are eligible for due to their immigration status. And so I mentioned this to the city manager, that I would like us to look into that fund and see if, in terms of our American Rescue Plan Act money, if there made sense for us to give a proportional contribution of some kind to support workers here in Eugene who were impacted by COVID and don't qualify for any of those kinds of unemployment or other benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any other counselors with comments? Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. You may have seen we received communication today from a constituent requesting action around gas-powered landscape equipment, specifically gas-powered leaf blowers. That is not something that is new here in South Eugene. Since I took office, I've received, I can see Alan and Mike raising their eyebrows, but state of California has taken action, and the stats stack up against the gas-powered leaf blower. So from an environmental standpoint and from an equity standpoint, I've raised the issue with the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency and was able to get it on the agenda for the Citizens Advisory Committee to report back to LRAPA. The Citizens Advisory Committee is tomorrow at noon. If you go to lrapa.org, you can participate and provide your testimony, either written or verbal. And LRAPA as an agency will meet again in November, and hopefully we can bring back to council some recommendations based on studies and the dialogue through the LRAPA Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Keating, I wanted to explain my smile there. It wasn't really an eye roll so much as a smile. And I don't want to minimize this issue to so many folks in our community who feel very, very strongly about it. I know that after years of hearing public testimony about it. I just want to say that I smiled because your predecessor, that was maybe one of, and now I can see several smiles, that was one of her biggest issues for the longest period of time. Betty would bring that up on a very regular basis, especially this time of year. And I think it comforts all of us to hear you carry on her legacy in that regard. And I think that's what all of us are smiling at a little bit. So I want to say good job.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, just to ditto that. Betty Taylor was like a dog with a bone on that issue. As long as I was on council, and she predated me for several years, she had brought that up years. She won me over pretty easily and pretty early, but we never quite had the votes on council to do anything about it. Maybe the climate change pollution part of it is a way to come at it from a different angle, which Betty didn't, it wasn't something that Betty took on, but maybe that's a way to get it done at a local level. But yeah, it's a long standing issue with not enough support to do something about it.
Manager, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna give everybody a heads up that we have a opening on our council agenda on Wednesday, and I'm gonna bring back the issue we picked up a couple of Mondays ago around right-of-way and resolutions that we need to pass around capital construction projects that are federally funded, mostly so we can walk you through either a project that's coming up or possibly the South Willamette project, so you understand kind of what we're talking about. And then I'll understand more of the process that we're going to go forward with, which could be either thinking about how we do this as part of consent calendar 2 or scheduling work sessions for each of these projects. So we're just going to have a little bit of time to talk about that and kind of get your direction on our process.
Thank you for that. And I have just one closing comment, which is a plea to all of my colleagues and anyone listening, which is to please donate blood. We are very short on a blood supply, and it's very easy to do. The website is bloodworksnw for northwest.org, bloodworksnw.org. You have to do it by appointment. I donate every couple of months, and I donated about 2 weeks ago, and you know, it's fast, it's painless, they're really good cookies at the end, and you are saving lives by doing it. So I would just encourage you, you don't need to carve out a huge amount of time in your schedule in order to do this. And it is really critically important. And those of you who have a little more time can donate platelets, which takes 2 hours. Donating blood takes, 40 minutes. So thank you all for considering that and hopefully signing up and doing something about it. And with that, I think we're ready to move on to the consent calendar.
Thank you. So I move to approve the items on consent calendar 1.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That passes. Thank you very much. And now we're ready to move into the public forum. The public forum is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the City Council on any city-related issues except for those items which have already been heard by a hearings official. When it is your turn, the moderator will announce your name and promote you to panelist status. Please state your name clearly and, for Eugene residents, your ward if known, before beginning your comments. Each person will have 2.5 minutes to speak. If you are watching the meeting, the timer should be visible. A yellow light will come on when you have 15 seconds to complete your comments. The red light indicates the end of the 2.5 minutes. For those who have connected to the meeting via phone and don't have the benefit of seeing the timer, please be aware that your microphone will be muted at the 2.5 minute mark. And with that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Naya, I assume is running this meeting and will moderate the speakers.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just briefly, I'm going to show the lineup for speakers for tonight. Okay, so our first speaker is going to be Wendy Beck, followed by Amy Okati-Oyekan.
Hello, my name is Wendy Beck, and I reside in Councilor Zelenka's ward. As of October 3rd, I've worked with the City of Eugene for 18 years. And I'm also an elected official on AFSCME's 1724 Executive Board and a member of AFSCME's contract bargaining team. I come to you not only with concerns I have as a City of Eugene employee and resident of Eugene, but also with the collective concerns of 600 plus AFSCME members I help represent. The city recently announced that managers and other non-union represented employees will receive a 6% pay increase effective January 2022, while management plans to only offer a 1% cost of living increase to AFSCME workers. How is such a pay increase justified for management, but not for unionized employees? We've been told there's a budget deficit, but where is the money for management's increase coming from? How is this difference in COLAs reasonable? We all live in the same communities, pay the same taxes, and shop at the same stores. We too have rent and mortgages. Our wages need to be competitive also, and yet we lag behind other jurisdictions. We can't begin to keep up with inflation with a 1% COLA. AFSCME employees across the board are reaching out to us to let us know they feel disrespected and undervalued. We are asking for fair market-based wages and for a contract that compensates us adequately, a fair contract that is not a gift, but one we've earned. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Wendy. Next is Amy, followed by Danny Noonan.
Dear Mayor Venice and City Council, thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony. My name is M.A. Okoti-Oyekan, and I'm a resident of Ward 1. I'm an independent consultant working to advance climate justice and community resiliency. I'm also an alternate on the City of Eugene's equity panel. I hadn't had a lupus flare up in almost 3 years, and I was one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the ones that could ignore this terrifying thing that wreaked havoc in other people's lives because it wasn't right here happening to me. By 12 noon on Saturday, June 26th, 2021, temperatures in Eugene had breached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. By the following Wednesday, I was having trouble walking without stumbling. I was in the ER feeling stupid because, of course, I knew about my illness, but I didn't believe in its existence, not enough to take my circumstances seriously and prepare for what was to come. Don't be like me. The climate crisis is here. Don't wait to be reminded about your mortality to do something about it. I'm requesting that at your upcoming November 17th work session, you forward 2 motions. First, to direct staff to draft ordinance language to mandate 100% new construction in the city to be all electric without gas hookups, and 2, to direct staff to create a roadmap for equitably transitioning Eugene's buildings off of fracked gas in the coming decades. In the meantime, just as one with a known illness that creates photosensitivity wouldn't spend a day outside in 100-degree weather, a city with known goals for climate action should not be building the 4th gas station within 3 years, all within a mile of each other. The 7-Eleven proposal on Polk and 7th is one that carries adverse climate and environmental justice implications and should be denied. Building more gas stations is the antithesis to the City of Eugene's climate action plan. We have an opportunity here and a moral imperative to advance robust climate action for our city. A just transition off of fossil fuels is the only way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, address public health disparities, and improve community access to and participation in climate solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ame. Next is Danny Noonan, followed by Carolyn Partridge.
Mayor Venice, City Councillors and City Manager Maderi, thank you for the opportunity to give testimony this evening. My name is Danny Noonan. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm a climate and energy strategist with Breach Collective, which is a 501c3 organization based in Eugene and Portland. I'm also a resident of Ward 1. I'm testifying again this evening on behalf of the Fossil Free Eugene Coalition, and I wanted to focus my testimony specifically on the global context in which the city's sort of ongoing discussions about regulating methane gas use in buildings and in new infrastructure are occurring. As it happens, the bulk of my day-to-day work at Breach Collective focuses on international climate advocacy, and as you may be aware, world leaders will be meeting in Glasgow, Scotland next week for the 26th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this is the first conference since the United States rejoined the Paris Agreement at the beginning of this year. Article 4.3 of the Paris Agreement requires countries' mitigation actions to reflect their, quote, highest possible ambition. In recent weeks, we have seen the United States' ambition at the federal level thwarted by a handful of senators. So it appears to be the case that if this country, if the United States, is to contribute its highest possible ambition towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, including the goal to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius, it is once again going to be up to local leaders such as yourselves to pave the way, much as it was up to local leaders during the Trump administration to show their commitment to the goals of the Paris Agreement. So that's the context in which our coalition's demands for building decarbonisation are occurring. Now is not the time for further delay or half measures. Instead, now is the time to move forward with the following 2 motions for the upcoming work session on November 17th. 1, for staff to draft ordinance language to ban the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure in the city, and 2, for staff to begin drafting a plan for how Eugene can equitably electrify in the coming decade. In truth, this is the minimum ambition you should show as a city towards addressing the climate crisis. As someone who lives 2 blocks away, I also ask that you come out in opposition to the new gas station on 7th and Polk. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Next is Carolyn followed by Dal Olek. Carolyn, please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mayor Venus, councilors, and City Manager Maderi. My name is Carolyn Partridge, and I live in Ward 2. I want to thank you for all the hard work you have been doing to solve Eugene's many problems. One problem that continues to worry me, and that's why I'm here again, is that we are not on track to meet the goals of the Climate Recovery Ordinance. To meet the first goal, we need to reduce citywide use of fossil fuels by 50% from our 2010 usage by the year 2030. Unfortunately, 7 years after the ordinance was passed, that intent has not translated into sufficient action. I was disheartened to learn that despite being a member of the Climate Collaborative, 4J is building new schools with methane gas hookups. This seems like a huge missed opportunity for lowering emissions, since buildings account for 1/3 of our total emissions. Every new building that uses methane instead of electricity will be locking in excess emissions for about 40 years. I learned that most large buildings, including schools, use standard specifications for their HVAC systems. These specifications are not written locally. By the time the plans reach the Eugene Planning Department, the choice of an HVAC system is a done deal because the entire building has now been designed around the standard specs. We need to bypass this type of systemic inertia that is hobbling our efforts. We could accomplish this by passing an ordinance mandating that all new construction must be 100% electric. Due to the urgency of the climate situation, we should not be dragging our feet. I encourage you to have staff begin drafting such an ordinance at your upcoming CAP work session. Meeting our emission goals is the least we can do for future generations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next is Dal Olek, followed by Ana Molina.
Good evening, Council. My name is Dal Olek. I am the local president for ASME 1724, the city's largest labor union. We represent 635 members, and we are the general service workers for the city of Eugene. Our members include the office support staff, the program coordinators, custodians, library workers, and parks and maintenance workers. We work to improve the community, to provide clean water, and to keep the streets, parks, libraries, rec centers safe, clean, and beautiful. At the start of the pandemic, before the vaccine was available, many of our members were classified as essential workers. This meant we were required to come into work every day. We put ourselves and our families at risk, and while our supervisors and managers were mostly able to work from home, we came to work every day. We proudly served our community when it was needed. We've been in contract negotiations with the city since March. While we've made some progress, we have yet to reach a fair contract. Many of you may have noticed that the cost of groceries, gas, and rent have increased over the past year. The city is offering us a 1% pay increase based on the cost of living in the first year of our contract. The average wage for the bargaining unit is approximately $18.50. That pay increase would be $28 a month for the average employee. The city is saying that they don't have the resources for a higher cost of living adjustment, yet they are able to give themselves a 6% wage increase. This amounts to $344 a month for the average manager. How is this even fair? We live in the same community, we attend the same schools, we shop at the same stores. Prices are going up, and our members are feeling the pinch. The stalled negotiations and the lack of a fair contract is impacting employee morale. The message to employees seems to be that management doesn't care about them, that their hard work and sacrifice during the pandemic has been forgotten. We think the city managers need to do better. We're asking for a contract that recognizes their contribution and service to the community and that keeps our wages in market. A fair contract based on family wages and equitable benefits. We ask your assistance in bringing these negotiations to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Del. Next is Ana Molina, followed by Lisa Arkin.
Hello, dear Mayor Venice, City Council, and City Manager Mederi. Thank you for providing this opportunity for testimony. My name is Ana Molina, and I am a resident in Ward 3. I'm also the statewide Environmental Justice Projects Manager for Beyond Toxics, and our office is located in Ward 7. We work on issues relating to environmental justice and have done a lot of work around air quality in West Eugene. I'm here today to talk about the gas stations that have been approved in the city of Eugene and to request that during the upcoming work session on November 17th, City Council will forward 2 motions. One, for staff to draft ordinance language to ban the construction of new fossil fuel infrastructure in the city, and 2, for staff to begin drafting a plan for how Eugene can equitably electrify in the coming decades, prioritizing low-income and BIPOC residents. As a resident of Eugene and an organizer, it really concerns me to see the city has recently approved 5 large capacity gas stations, a 7-Eleven at 7th and Polk, a 7-Eleven at 11th and Bailey Hill Road, a 7-Eleven at Highway 99 in Roosevelt, another 7-Eleven at 7th and Garfield, and an Arco on Highway 99 in Roosevelt. All of these gas stations were approved without any notifications and involvement of the community who would be impacted by their construction. This feels like a contradiction to the City of Eugene's climate recovery ordinance by approving new fossil fuel infrastructure. This is also a contradiction to the Climate Action Plan 2.0 of Eugene's pathway to address climate change by creating a better, more equitable, and more livable community for everyone. Transitioning off of fossil fuels is a critical step in mitigating the worst impacts of the climate crisis while creating more resilient and healthy communities in the face of the impacts that we are already experiencing here in Oregon. By not transitioning off of fossil fuels, we are not just contributing to the climate crisis, but also exposing residents who live near new gas stations to increased levels of car and truck exhaust and other pollutants containing particulate matter such as benzene, carbon monoxide, and much more. Especially when a majority of these gas stations are located in areas where there's already increased air pollution and people who have health impacts. Now is the time to take action to address climate change, and I hope you move forward the request I had mentioned in the beginning. So thank you for your time, and I hope you can look into the problem of approving new gas stations in Eugene as well.
Thank you, Anna. Next is Lisa Arkin, followed by Rexton Shu.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. My name is Lisa Arkin. I live in Ward 1, and I'm the Executive Director of Beyond Toxics. In the Eugene Climate Action Plan 2.0, many pages are devoted to stating that the city will do everything it can to transition city operations and the community away from fossil fuel use. In fact, there's a distinct message that residents are responsible for the majority of emissions from fossil fuels, and the report states, quote, emissions are forecasted to reach 3.13 million metric tons of carbon by 2030 if the community continues with its current growth and consumption patterns. And it goes on to say that the city is doing everything it can to help the community reach its goals. And yet, despite these proclamations, it's the city that has recently approved 5 large capacity gas stations in close proximity to each other. And 4 of these locations are near middle to low income residential neighborhoods. And you've already heard the location, so I'll not go there. But, you know, you have to wonder, the city council has heard residents of West Eugene describe their experiences in poor health due to poor air quality, and yet it continues to permit gas stations in defiance, I would say, of its own climate action plan. Benzene, which is a emission from car exhaust, is a known carcinogen, as well as carbon monoxide and diesel particulate and other kinds of particulate matter. Also, benzene is associated with childhood leukemia and multiple myeloma for children within 1/4 of a mile of gas stations. By building gas stations, the city is also turning clean property, former bank sites, into something that will eventually become a brownfield and possibly not suitable for housing, despite the city's proclamation that is trying to provide more housing. These sites will have to be cleaned up because of underground gasoline storage tanks. And this is very expensive and usually has to be done through grants. Mayor Vinis, this is a quote from you in the CAP 2.0 report, that you will have to help make hard choices ahead to address the needed actions for climate change. So I ask each of you to take action now to affect or alter the systems to enable our community.
Thank you, Lisa. Your time has concluded. Next is Ruxton Shu, followed by Chad.
Good evening, City Councilors, Mayor Vinis, and constituents of Eugene. My name is Ruxton Shu, and in full disclosure, I am an employee of the City of Eugene, and I am here on my personal time and using my personal resources. I am a member of AFSCME Council 1724 and am on our contract bargaining committee. I am here to discuss the affront on our member rights as city management has proposed contract language that would permanently weaken our union security. City management told the union's bargaining committee that any financial package being offered was contingent on the union accepting their modifications to our contract's layoff language. This language would allow them to weaken our layoff rights in 3 key ways. It greatly reduces union involvement in the layoff process. It broadens the definition of when the layoff process can be leveraged, and it introduces a plan to reduce workers' hours for up to 25% of their hours for up to 6 months at a time. This means a full-time employee would be reduced to 30 hours per week. For example, the senior administrative specialist making $2,850 per month would have their pay reduced by over $700 each month. Our members are declaring en masse that they cannot financially weather this burden. We are not talking about the comforts of life, but the ability to secure basic necessities, housing, groceries, transportation, and on. Further, management's proposal does not limit how or when the cuts could be implemented, allows for multiple 6-month periods to be implemented, eliminates employee security rights, and reduces the ability of the union to suggest alternatives and cost-cutting measures. AFSCME has a long-standing contract with the city. We have successfully negotiated economic downturns in the early 90s and in the Great Recession. The contract layoff provisions are tested and proven to be effective. No other bargaining units at the city are being asked to give up their seniority rights and accept a 25% reduction in pay for up to 6 months. In fact, no other jurisdiction in the state is asking their workers to accept mandatory furloughs. Please understand that we cannot afford to accept this language now, nor can we afford to pass this along to all future AFSCME employees at the City of Eugene. We are your community members, your neighbors, our children attend your schools, and we frequent your businesses. Please understand that giving city management this self-proclaimed tool to right-size the organization cannot come at the expense of our members' prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruxton. Next is Chad, followed by Linda Baker.
Hello, my name is Chad McCarty. I'm a resident of Eugene here in Ward 3, and I'm a healthcare worker here in Eugene. I'd like to talk today about another health and safety issue that I believe concerns our community and the global community as well. And I'd like to, and that issue is wireless safety. I'd like to start with, or just cover a couple of recent news stories that I think underscore the importance of this issue and how I believe that there's a critical mass of scientific evidence and public support for pushing back on the telecom companies and so forth. The first one is that the first couple are from France, and so they're global examples, but last year, 70 plus mayors and elected officials in France called for a moratorium on the 5G rollout due to health and safety concerns. Also, more recently, France's High Council on Climate reported that the 5G rollout would represent a huge, very significant increase in CO2 emissions that would make it more difficult for France to meet their climate goals. Closer to home in the United States here, there was a recent court case, CHD versus FCC in the Ninth Circuit Court, in which the petitioners, CHD, Children's Health Defense, filed 11,000 pages of evidence of health and safety harm to children and adults. That's 11,000 pages of peer-reviewed science. And there seems to be a lot that cities can do as far as modifying and updating code to safeguard against needless exposure to wireless radiation and to push back on the telecom inundation into our communities with the dangerous 5G technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Next is Linda Baker, followed by phone ending in 327. And Linda, you had your hand raised and it was lowered, so I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so somehow I got kicked out of the meeting on my phone, on my computer, so I'm using my phone now. Sorry, and my dog is in my way. Sorry. Right. So my name is Linda Baker, and I live in Ward 1. I work in planning and development. I'm the AFSCME union president, a 4J parent, a U of O student, and an essential worker. I've worked on the site, on site in the office daily since the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm really proud to have been a part of what kept the city moving along during the pandemic. I'm a member of AFSCME, which is the lowest paid bargaining group in the city, and I'm also the lowest paid person on my work team. I pay a larger portion of my pay to the city's insurance premiums than my boss. My retirement contribution is matched by the city at 2%, and my supervisor's retirement contribution is matched at 3%. I'm at the top step of my pay grade and I receive no step increases, only the 1% COLA increase the city offers us, which will amount to a 25-cent pay increase. The city is giving my supervisor a COLA increase of nearly 6% in January, and the only requirement is that my supervisor have an aspirational conversation with their supervisor. They call this performance pay. The city's motivation for this pay increase is so they can retain talent, and that this is something that they've learned is important during COVID, even if they need to reduce city services. City leadership wants the ability to also lay me and other AFSCME members off for up to 10 hours for 6 months with no limits to the amount of times we can be laid off. And they're stating that this is a cost-saving measure due to what they've learned from COVID. The city says I matter, but it doesn't feel or seem like I do. Thank you for your time. And I really hope that you'll take this to heart and help us move this bargaining process along. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Next is phone ending in 327.
Hi, this is William Smith from Ward 1. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to speak about both wireless safety and broadband infrastructure. First, I'd like to follow up on Chad's comment about things that cities can do to push back on the telecoms. And I believe I explained some of this a month ago to councilors and mayor. And but I'll just say again that Attorney Andrew Campanelli has been assisting cities in doing just that very effectively. And he gave an excellent half-hour free talk at the website wireamerica.org, or at least that's where it's posted. And I guess just one or two highlights from his approach is that Congress in 1996 had the foresight to enact into law, signed by the president, the Telecommunications Act, which reserves the right of cities to limit wireless radiation exposure of their citizens and city workers by requiring the telecoms for each tower, requiring the telecoms prove that that tower, whatever tower, is needed to prevent dropped calls. And that can be very easily verified by any city worker with a device. And it's not the same as a sophisticated computer model, making it look like you need more function. Anyway, there are lots more examples, but that's my favorite. Now to broadband infrastructure. From a front page article of the Register Guard during the summer, my understanding is that hundreds of thousands of dollars has been allocated to the city. And the city is intending, or was intending, to evaluate next steps. I'd like to point out that Harvard law professor Susan Crawford, who wrote the book Fiber, America's Tech Revolution, or let's see, something like Tech Revolution and Why We Might Miss It. And why she wrote that book is because she visited cities like Chattanooga, very similar size to Eugene.
Thank you, William. Your time has concluded. And Mayor, that concludes the public forum for this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to, I'm sorry for those couple of you that got cut off at the last minute. And William in particular, I know you were mid-sentence. So if you want to submit complete your thought in writing to us, that would be great. So we'll hear the end of that testimony. Really just want to appreciate everyone stepping out and the variety of comments. I see Councilor Keating has a comment, so I'll turn it over to you, Councilor Keating.
Thanks, Mayor. I think I saw a Great Dane in Linda Baker's background. Looked like could be a family member of Vegas. So that was kind of cool to see. Thanks to everyone who provided testimony tonight, echoing the mayor's gratitude. I don't want to insert myself in bargaining by any stretch of the imagination, but I do want to illustrate, like any community member that I've engaged with, I long for a fair and equitable contract resolution. In regards to the gas station testimony we received, it's a little mind-boggling, and does I appreciate the gas stations aren't in South Eugene, but and South Eugene constituents, Ward 2 constituents, didn't raise the issue, but I greatly appreciate bringing the issue to council because it does seem to fly in the face of our stated climate reduction goals. And when I think of the newly proposed gas station on Bailey Hill and 11th, I scratch my head and wonder why we need a gas station every MX stop. Think about it. You have an MX stop and a gas station at Walmart. You have an MX stop and a gas station right near the veterinary clinic. And then you've got gas stations at Fred Meyer. And we're at a time in history where we should be putting in more electric charging stations. And yet the point that was made, there are gas stations being built up in the densest part of our community, when the whole point of building up and building dense housing is to reduce your carbon footprint and to encourage use of public transportation and alternative transportation. So I stand with every member of the community who shared their concerns tonight about more gas stations in our community. They're not needed, and we need to be taking far more bold action to reduce our carbon footprint, as stated. A reduction in of 50% of 2010 numbers, usage by 2030 in 9 short years. Let's start finding ways to reduce our residents' use of fossil fuel rather than adding to the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciated everyone who spoke tonight. I want to take off from Councillor Keating's comments and challenge members of our community who spoke to us tonight on the issue related to the gas station. There's a cognitive dissonance for me here, and it's this. If most of the people who live in our city are cognizant of the issue of climate change and are smart folks who want to see us reduce our carbon going into the atmosphere, then how in the world can this city support 5 new gas stations? How is it that people are buying the gas? Why aren't they putting those places out of business because nobody's buying the gas there? I would suggest that the demand for the gasoline is there. And that says something to the people who live here's how important it is to them, how they understand their actions. And I would, rather than ask us to force people to live differently, I would encourage our friends, especially I have great respect for Lisa Arkin and the organization. I would encourage them to do more work with education for folks, because if people weren't buying the gasoline, there would be no demand to create new stations. And if people didn't want it and they didn't want to use it, I would say there's opportunity for education in our community in a different way than we've done before. So I just needed to throw that out there.
Thank you. Councillor Ye.
Yeah, thanks. So maybe Sarah or someone else on staff, I've had folks talk to me about these new gas stations as well, and I don't quite understand where we are in the process, or if there is even anything to be done at this point, or whether everything's a done deal. So I just appreciate getting someone to send out some information about how this process is moving along and where we are in it. I think Mike makes a good point that people use gas and therefore it's going to be sold. But I think what Lisa Arkin was trying to get at is it's also has an impact on the folks who have to live around those stations. So it's not as simple as, which I know Mike knows, but I don't know, it's not as simple as just, people want it and so we're going to sell it. We have lots of things that are harmful that we regulate because we don't necessarily want them sold everywhere or in every way that's possible. So I just love to get some more information because I feel a little uneducated on, the process here.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Councillor Saret.
Yeah, I have the same question as Councillor Ye. I mean, people may not know, but individual gas station permits don't come before City Council. Presumably they go through commercial permitting process similar to other businesses, though I'm sure there are some particulars that are different because they are dealing with hazardous materials. I think at least 3 of them are either built and some of them are open or almost open. So I think the one at 7th and Polk, which is asking for a zoning change, I believe, and so I would love to kind of know what that process is for the zoning change. I think the upshot is that if a majority on this council feel that we should be discouraging the building of new gas stations, and I too have been like, what's the deal with the investment in all these gas stations? Like, it's interesting. Perhaps they are putting them in now because they are anticipating that we might be taking action that would prevent them from coming in later. I don't know. That's total speculation on my part, but it does seem like we've just suddenly had all these gas stations being built. So it seems to me we would have to take some action as a city council to change our city code to disallow them as a use under whatever permit they're being allowed under. So I think right now they're an allowed use, and if they meet the requirements of their permit, the city has to allow them to be built. And it would take some proactive steps on our part to change that. So that I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you, Manager. Did you had your hand raised? Did you want to speak to that a little?
I did. Well, I had my hand raised and then I lowered it when Councilor Syret was talking because she was covering a lot of the points, which is we can get you some more information about some of the active permits that are happening, but I would suggest what she said. There's going to be places where it's an outright permitted use, and the only way you would stop that is to change the code and change that outright permitted use. And there may be a place where we're going through a zone change. I'm not familiar with that. So we'll get you some more from them.
Thank you. I do want to appreciate all the testimony that has brought this before us, because it is there's sort of this larger picture, regardless of the specifics on code changes and what's a permitted use, this larger picture of how do we interrupt the business as usual around heating systems, around infrastructure, like how do we begin to turn that tide. And I know what activists are asking of us in terms of regulating fossil fuel use, but it is, I think we all feel the frustration of buildings going in with gas heating, of gas stations going in, when this clearly flies in the face of what we are aiming to do. And so I appreciate the testimony calling our attention to the fact that if we're going to intervene, we need to intervene. And if we're going to try and change that trajectory. So very much appreciate that testimony. And then I join Councilor Keating's comments that we look for a fair bargaining process for the AFSCME employees. And so thank you for bringing that also to our attention. And Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. I was trying to refrain from commenting, but I can't help myself here. First of all, I too want to just voice my concern for our employees. I have a great affinity for them and respect for the work that they do. And I'm hoping that, having sat on both sides of the bargaining table in my past, I know it can be a difficult and challenging process. I'm just hoping for, finding that pathway to reach a deal. Other than that, I know it's important to let the process work. I have great faith in the process. And secondly, speaking to the gas station issues, I too have been kind of puzzled to see so many stations popping up, and all but one are in the same corridor, which I find interesting. But I also know that they don't build these things without a market and consumers that are using them, as Councilor Clark pointed out. So, and one of the things I've asked with our climate action plan is where is the piece working with individual responsibility for coming along with this? I mean, we as a local government can't regulate every aspect of life. And it comes down to, we all have a level of personal responsibility that we need to exercise and exercise responsibly. So, I like to hammer home on that piece. Personally, I think less regulation and more responsible behavior. And so I would like to see concepts and ideas of how we push that individual piece as well. Thank you.
Councilor Clark, one more comment?
Yeah, I just kind of want to take off on Councilor Grove's comments there and agree with him and say, I'm much less likely to want to say to people, you can't do this. I'm much more inclined to say, hey, if you're willing to try this other thing, this is better for everybody. We have, and I can be accused of being overly a cheerleader here, I think, but we have a company in our community that's building electric cars. And I think that's the coolest thing ever. I'd kind of like to buy one myself at some point. I think it's a great idea. I don't know why everybody doesn't drive. I'd like to see us, if we really want to be a productive part of this, address the demand side of this equation by incentive, by example, by any other means, rather than say, we're going to limit people's choices, say, we're going to show people a better way to go. is actually more beneficial for him. And as much as I argue with Councilor Zelenka, he has a habit of providing ideas and thoughts in that way. And so I would encourage us to go down that road before we go down the road of we're going to restrict what everybody can do. So thank you.
Thank you. I will say that we actually have done that. We have a transportation system plan that calls for electrification and active transit. We participate in with LTD and, you know, pursuing better transit systems. I mean, we are doing that. So it's all of these things at once. And how do you get ahead of the curve and ahead of the demand, or at least catch up to the demand? So good conversation. Thank you all very much. And if that's the last comment, I think I will adjourn the meeting of the Eugene City Council and call to order the meeting of the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency for our final item of business, action on the 942 Olive purchase and sale agreement. And I'll turn that over to the manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just thinking, I'm distracted and delaying because I was thinking, actually, I think you're turning it over to the Urban Renewal Director. I don't know what my role is in that space, but not city manager. Periodically, when we sell property, we have conditions that are attached to purchase and sale agreements. And so tonight's action is really related around the 942 Olive Street, which used to be the Bradford building that the Urban Renewal Agency sold to the University of Oregon in 2015. When we did that, the conditions of the agreement required the university to keep it as an entrepreneurial hub anchored by the Regional Accelerator and Innovation Network. So Eugene RAIN, as most of us know it. They, before they did that, the U of O made considerable investments. They renovated the property for a total cost of $2.7 million, making it safer, more functional, more visually appealing. And the state of Oregon funded more than half of that with capital bonds. So from the time that they did that until the pandemic, they 100% fulfilled all of that. And then had some situations with RAIN, mostly that it was just difficult to run it and it became financially infeasible. And so RAIN kind of dissolved, although the university has continued to use it as an entrepreneurial hub. So what we're doing tonight is really a transparency item to say, this was important to the council before, it's important now. So what we're trying to do is actually change the language to say it's the University of Oregon needs to keep it an entrepreneurial hub, but we're removing the reference to RAIN and letting the University of Oregon maintain that leadership position around continuing to use it for that purpose. So that's really what it's for, is to just be totally transparent and make sure that that property is used for its intended purposes, regardless of what organization they may decide to contract or subcontract with.
Thank you for that explanation. Are there any questions or comments from council on this? Or Councilor Zelenka.
Miss Urban Renewal District Manager, why did the funding go away for RAIN?
I'm not 100% sure. I just know that they didn't have enough financial resources to successfully operate the accelerator and all the associated programming. So there could be, Anne, I don't know if Anne's on the call and she or Denny has more specifics, or will. If there's somebody out there that has the specifics about their funding.
The mayor's chomping at the bit.
Oh, or the mayor.
Mayor Venus, do you want to answer that? Okay. So they initially were set up with funding from the state, but then never actually built up a sustainable funding model where it could operate without state funding, and the state discontinued funding it. And so it didn't have enough money. It wasn't doing enough of its own fundraising, and then hadn't some other accelerators like that. What they'll do is actually they'll invest money in a company and then have a piece of equity in that company, and the money will come back to it. And we didn't, and RAIN wasn't set up that way, and so there was no long-term. It wasn't financially independent.
Do you want to add something to that, Mayor?
Well, I would just add, so the landscape shifted a little bit. I would say also that the state was very interested in more rural outreach. And so there was a priority in state funding towards rural entrepreneurship. And so the Oregon Reign was able to sort of fill that niche and move in that direction. But the Eugene Reign didn't sort of fit what we were doing in this community. So it compounded, I would say, some of the challenges.
Okay, thanks. It relates to my second question, which is in the amendments to the purchase and sale agreement, eliminates Reign as the identified entity in recital C, but in recital B, it does that too, but then it replaces that with language that says to support entrepreneurship and innovation consistent with Oregon Business Development Department's bonding requirements to the University of Oregon. I don't know what that means and what are those bonding requirements? And that was not in our packet.
My guess, unless Ann wants to jump in here, what I understand is that some of the financing, similar to the purchase and sale agreement, some of the financing for the property was also tied to those economic and entrepreneurial goals.
Yes, so some of the language that was included was at the request of the University of Oregon to make sure that they continue to meet their obligations as well. And so that was part of those. So what Sarah said was my understanding as well, is they need some things in there to make sure that it's clear that they are meeting their other obligations that were connected, because that was at their request.
So is it fair to say that the funding for that building, its renovation and what they were doing with it and what they continue to do with it, that funding came from Oregon Business Development Department? And so that money has strings attached to it, and this agreement needs to abide by those strings as well.
I think those are all super safe assumptions, but we can find out, like those exact dots being connected. I didn't have concerns with their requested language, and so it didn't, because it didn't impact what was the basis of your all decisions. And so
right.
So I would agree. I would say that our purchase and sale agreement, our agreement to sell this to the university, had strings attached, and they sought funding based on those strings. So our strings are the first strings.
Right. And so this was a change at the request of the University of Oregon, and it impacts their ability to move forward, not necessarily ours.
I think it's a shared interest to make sure that the purchase and sale agreement reflects what council really wanted to intend with that site, which is why we're bringing it to clarify it. It feels, it doesn't feel right to have it continue on pointing to Reign if Reign's not an organization that exists. And so what I thought seemed appropriate was, as long as the university is committed to keeping it an entrepreneurial hub and focused on innovation, and that responsibility lies on them, that felt like that would meet the intent of the council.
Right. So the full sentence says support entrepreneurship and innovation consistent with the bonding requirements. So the bonding requirements are what the U of O used to do what they did at this address. And so entrepreneurship and innovation are the essence of what those bonds were sold for. So this needs to be consistent with that. And that's more on the U of O than us, because they're on the hook for that, not the city of Eugene. But so I now understand it. Thank you very much. And fine with that.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I fully intend to support and vote in favor of this, but I wonder, Sarah or Ann, if you can tell me, is it the university's intent, or maybe you can talk more about the difference in use that the university will have for that facility? Will it work in support of, in in harmony with any of their efforts at the new research areas across Franklin? In other words, let me just ask a more broad question. Can you talk about the work that will be done inside that structure in the future?
And maybe you can talk about now and into the future.
Sure.
Onward.
The university is basically using it in the same way it was used before the pandemic. They're just starting to get it open up again. They're going to have they're working with Onward Eugene to provide entrepreneurial educational programming. They've had an accelerator that was virtual. They're looking to move that to in-person. I believe this week is their first coffee meetup, which is a very low barrier way for potential entrepreneurs to come in and meet with potential mentors, and using the classroom space for all of that activity. It's one landing place for any commercial activity that comes out of the night campus. They do expect to see a lot more commercialization of academic research through that. It doesn't have wet lab space, and a lot of that night campus will need a very bioscience focus, but it's an important tool, a place for all of that kind of activity to happen, just as it was going on in 2016 and 2017 and 2018. They're just picking it back up.
Okay, thanks. That's what I was looking for.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, I'll turn to Councillor Ye to put a motion on the table.
Thanks, Mayor. I move to authorize the agency director to execute the first amendment to the purchase and sale agreement for 942 Olive Street as set forth in attachment C.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that passes unanimously. Thank you so very much. Thank you all for the whole evening of conversations, and have a good night. We are adjourned.